Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely sitting in the Kremlin right now with a big, fat smile that he cannot wipe off his face, ready and waiting for January 20th. In his first public comments since the United States election was called, Putin spoke glowingly about Donald Trump. New York Times reports this, quote, Putin speaking at a conference in Sochi, Russia, said Trump acted, quote, like a man after surviving the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania last summer, adding that Trump's stated desires to improve ties with Russia and end the Ukraine war deserve attention. And he suggested that he expected Trump to act more freely in his second term, signaling a hope that Trump would finally follow through on his Russia-friendly rhetoric. Quote, I very much expect that our relationship with the United States will eventually be restored, Putin said. We are open to this. Trump on the campaign trail boldly claimed that he can solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours without ever providing any details as to how he would do that. But today, even Putin's spokesperson shot that idea down. From Reuters, quote, President Putin is ready to discuss Ukraine with Donald Trump, but that does not mean he's willing to alter Moscow's demands, the Kremlin said Friday. Putin's spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, made the remarks after being asked at his daily news briefing if Putin's readiness to talk to the Republican president-elect reflected a willingness to change his demands, quote, the president has never said that the goals of the special military operation are changing. On the contrary, he has repeatedly said that they remain the same, Peskov said. An emboldened Russian president with an admirer returning to the White House is where we begin the hour with some of our favorite experts and friends. Former CIA Director John Brennan is here. Also joining us, former ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul is here, and former Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes is here. Director Brennan, first, your thoughts on how the CIA and how the American government is preparing for an American president so at ease and so comfortable with someone who greenlit and celebrated the war crimes carried out in Bucha, the attacks against civilians, schools, hospitals. I mean, the things that have been happening in Ukraine at the direction of Vladimir Putin have garnered the West's disdain. And Donald Trump sounds to have had a lovely chat with him today.
Well, Nicole, I think there's very deep-seated concern within the national security realm, as well as more broadly in terms of what is going to be Ukraine's fate now that Donald Trump will be returning to the White House. We all want this war and the bloodshed to come to an end, but the question is on whose terms. And it's clear that Donald Trump, who is a transactional individual, who also has a relationship with Vladimir Putin that goes back a number of years, is seeking to end the war, but giving Putin what he wants, which is a great concern, not only to Americans and Ukrainians, but also to Europe. It is very fearful about Vladimir Putin's aims on the rest of Europe. And so we're looking at a situation now where all of this effort made to try to prevent Russia from just gobbling up a large portion of Ukraine is at risk. And as Donald Trump has said previously, he believes he could end the war very quickly. And so, again, there is deep concern that he is just going to withdraw basically the extent of our support, military, economic, intelligence, and otherwise. That will make it very, very difficult for President Zelensky of Ukraine to withstand Russian pressure. So, again, this is a very worrisome period for all.
Director Brennan, is there any name in the names that Von Hilliard reported to be under consideration for Secretary of State that you think could be a bulwark against capitulation to Vladimir Putin on the topic of Ukraine?
Well, Rick Grinnell is not on that list of those who would stand up to it. I mean, Senator Rubio and Senator Haggerty, I think, are reasonable people who have, I think, a good appreciation of the U.S. role globally. the question is whether or not they're going to be able to stand up to a Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham has been a very outspoken supporter also of Ukraine. And so I think there's going to be members of Congress, Republican members of Congress, that are going to be quite concerned that Trump is going to capitulate to Vladimir Putin, which has really negative implications as far as the U.S. leadership role in the world and what signal it will send to our allies and partners that the United States is retreating from that leadership role, that they cannot count on us. And so I'm hoping that, again, it's going to be somebody that's going to be able to stand up, who has the integrity and also has the experience and the appreciation for the vital role the United States plays in global affairs.
Ambassador McFaul, when I played that tape back of Donald Trump talking about the human lives lost, war is a tragedy, obviously, in that regard. But I couldn't help but hear it in light of the other voice we heard in the closing days of the campaign, and that was General John Kelly, who in a recorded interview confirmed that Donald Trump believed that men and women who die serving their country are losers and suckers, but that he didn't understand sacrifice. So I wonder what you think Trump's real motive is on ending the war.
Well, I don't want to pretend to know his real motivations. We're not Facebook friends. He's not consulting me about jobs he's filling. So I want to say that first. Secondly, I don't think he cares about lives lost. I think he wants to be seen as the guy that gets a deal done. And I think he wants the world to see that he can mediate something that everybody else was not willing to do. The problem is, and most certainly the concern that Ukrainians have, I've spoken to many since Tuesday, is he doesn't care about the actual outcome for Ukrainians. And just to underscore, when people talk about this here in the United States, it's always about land for peace. Well, guess what? There's human beings that live in those occupied lands. So if you care about the people of Ukrainians, you should need to care about them as well, because you're giving away. Think about that. Millions of Ukrainians will be given away for these land for peace deals. The second thing that I think Trump gets wrong, he wants to be known as a big deal maker like that, but he thinks that weakening Zelensky will help him get a deal, cutting aid to Zelensky. And if you're Vladimir Putin, why would you stop your war at a time when your opponent is getting weaker? And that's why Mr. Peskov said what he just said today, because they understand that if Ukraine is weaker, they will have the capacity to take more. And so I just think it's a flawed negotiating strategy. And I hope, like John just said, that other people remember vast majorities in both the Senate and the House voted for more aid. I hope that those people will help convince Trump the only way you get a deal is when you stop Putin on the battlefield.
Ben, let me play you some of what Trump has said publicly about Vladimir Putin.
Yesterday, reporters asked me if I thought President Putin was smart. I said, of course he's smart, to which I was greeted with, oh, that's such a terrible thing to say. I'd like to tell the truth. Yes, he's smart. By the way, I'd like to congratulate Vladimir Putin for having made yet another great deal.
Russia and Putin never would have attacked Ukraine ever when I was there. And I talked about it, and it was the apple of his eye. I got along with him very well, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. You know, a lot of people think that's a bad thing. No, that's a great thing.
I think it's clear after Tuesday night that the Republican Party that hewed to anything closely to Reagan's view of the world is dead. But what does it say to you that someone who said all those things lavished such praise? I mean, the thing about MAGA is they're so pandering to Russia that the Russians feel like it's too much. We learned that Tucker Carlson's supermarket propaganda was too much for the Russians. They were like, you know, ooh, too available. What do you make of the American people going with the guy whose praise of Putin is almost too much for Putin?
Well, I think what we have to understand is Donald Trump is a like-minded fellow traveler of Vladimir Putin. They are both right-wing autocratic nationalists, and they're not alone. Viktor Orban obviously fits that category. There are plenty of other leaders. Bibi Netanyahu, I would say, fits that category. There are other leaders in Europe that fit that category. This is the new trend in geopolitics. And I think that we have to get our minds around, Nicole, is that this is no longer the outlier in American foreign policy. This is now the establishment in American foreign policy. The American people have chosen an autocratic nationalist to be our leader, somebody who has a similar idea of politics and transactional geopolitics as Vladimir Putin. The first term, Nicole, I think we all struggled with this. And we kept trying, we pointed him out as an outlier. And isn't it absurd that he's doing these things? And I think it is. But now this is here, and it's been validated by the American people after looking at him for 8 years. And so we have to kind of adjust to that. Importantly, I want to echo something Mike said, though. Vladimir Putin doesn't really care. His interests are to gobble up as much as Ukraine as he can. His interests are not to be friends with Donald Trump. If it's useful to him that there's a guy like Donald Trump in the White House, he'll take advantage of that, certainly. But he has designs on Moldova. He has designs on Georgia, 2 other countries that he would like to turn into kind of what Belarus is, which is essentially now a de facto Russian territory, essentially. That's what he's interested in. Trump is not going to gain something by trying to be more like Vladimir Putin in this relationship. He's just going to make it easier for Vladimir Putin to accomplish the ends that he wants to pursue. And that's why I think the question is not just whether there's like a Rubio in there. I would prefer that to Rick Grenell, of course. But what's more important to me is, what does Europe do? Does Europe try to fill this space in providing support to Ukraine? Can they? I don't think they can, actually, wholly. But that's what I'd be watching, because I have no faith that the United States will play that role under Donald Trump. Why we have to listen and take seriously what he said.
I think this is the feature now, right? Not the bug. It's all out in the open. And exactly. I think that I remember the first foreign trip, Trump's national security advisors and their staff would call back to the States and, take this speech. Trump's going to affirm America's commitment to Article 5. He delivered his first speech, said nothing about Article 5. It's like, he's going to do it here. They're literally lobbying him on a foreign trip to affirm America's commitment to Article 5. I think he does it on the 3rd or 4th stop. But it's all out in the open that he doesn't give a damn about NATO. John Bolton has said he would get out of it. John Kelly has said he would get out of it. But we have to assume that he will get out of it. And I wonder, Director Brennan, what that looks like.
Well, all Vladimir Putin has to do is repeat back to Donald Trump a number of his campaign statements and promises. Vladimir Putin is a trained intelligence officer, but it doesn't take a trained intelligence officer to know how to get the best of Donald Trump, which is to praise and to flatter him and to tell him that his ideas are just a genius or whatever. And, that's the exploitation of Donald Trump that I think individuals like Vladimir Putin will be able to pursue. And so just, again, looking at the situation in Ukraine, and I'm sure our European partners and allies are very, very concerned because they see what's happening. And as I think Ben pointed out, it's no longer to be said that Donald Trump was an aberration in terms of the drift in U.S. politics. Clearly, being reelected and going back into the White House shows that there's some type of shift here taking place in the United States to more nativist, isolationist, and protectionist policies that really raises serious questions about the global landscape in the coming years.
We need to deal with the Elon Musk of it all. I have to sneak in a quick break first. I'm going to ask all of you to stick around until the other side. We'll continue this conversation about what Donald Trump's reelection means for America's standing in the world, our relationship with Russia, the future of Ukraine, and how populist right-wing leaders around the world see Trump as one of their